Hey guys, as we all know, in the true crime community, there are a lot of other cases that are a lot more interesting than the case of Christopher Watts. So today we're going to talk about the case of Darlie Routier. I'll start right at the beginning, in case you're not familiar with the case. On June 6th of 1996, at 2:31 a.m., Darlie Routier dialed 911 and reported that an intruder had entered her home and fatally stabbed two of her children. Darlie was sleeping on the sofa in the main floor family room of her home, which was in Rowlett, Texas. Her two older children, 5-year-old Damon and almost 7-year-old Devin Routier, were sleeping on the floor just a couple of feet away from Darlie, right in front of the still playing television in the middle of the night. When Darlie woke up, at one point she said that one of her sons had tapped her on the shoulder saying, "Mommy, Mommy." But at another point, she told the story that she opened her eyes and she saw a man standing in her feet walking away from her. That's what she said in her written police statement a few days later, that a man was standing at her feet walking away from her. She said that she followed him. She walked behind him. And as he walked toward the garage door, he dropped the knife on the floor by the utility room. And that's when she stopped walking behind him. She stopped and picked up the knife. And then she went into the kitchen. She set the knife on the counter. And she said that's when she realized that her children had been attacked. And that's when she screamed for her husband, who was sleeping right upstairs in the master bedroom. I have a problem with that little storyline because Darlie's husband was a proud gun owner. So why didn't she scream when she opened her eyes and saw a man standing at her feet, walking away from her, is how she put it? Why didn't she scream right then and there for her husband? That just doesn't make sense, does it? That she wouldn't have screamed right then and there. Darlie wasn't arrested right away because actually the investigators didn't investigate her at first. They had a lot of leads to follow and they gathered a lot of evidence. And they investigated her husband actually first, along with following up on all the leads consistent with the intruder theory. They had like a parallel investigation going on right from the start. That it may have been an intruder or it may have been somebody from within the family. But they didn't start right off thinking it was Darlie. They started right off thinking maybe it was her husband, Darren Routier. And they investigated him. And they compared his story to the physical evidence. And his story, they said, was actually consistent with the physical evidence. But Darlie's story wasn't. Well, after a little while, Darlie was seen at the cemetery during the birthday party that they held for little Devin, which would have been his 7th birthday. And Darlie gave an interview, Darlie and Darren both, and she was smiling and, as one juror later put it, chomping her gum. And I think in a way she was kind of even flirting with the reporter. They talked for 45 minutes with that reporter. And Darlie seemed cheerful and upbeat. And then after the interview, Darlie and one of her sisters each grabbed a can of silly string and they proceeded to spray silly string all over the grave while they were looking like they were having fun. I shouldn't say they, because actually, Darlie's sister had an expression of sadness. But Darlie, she looked like she was having fun. And when the prosecutor saw that silly string video, that little clip of that silly string party on the news, he spoke with the investigators again and he said, "Tell me again, what is her story?" And he would later say in an interview that her story changed again. And that, I think, is when the investigators really kind of dug in and put the puzzle pieces together and figured out probably something that they just had a really tough time even beginning to believe could be true, that it was Darlie herself who had attacked her children. One of the investigators claimed that during one of Darlie's interviews at the police station, that she said to him repeatedly that if she did it, then she didn't remember. Now, on Darlie's defense, I think she has denied that right from the start. But the case proceeded to trial, and Darlie demanded to take the stand in her own defense. And the prosecutor would later say that Darlie turned out to be his best witness. The jury found Darlie guilty of committing capital murder in the death of 5-year-old Damon, and she was sent to death row. And she's been sitting on death row ever since. I think it was the first week in February of 1997 that they escorted her to death row, and she's been there ever since. Through the years, there have been many appeals filed, and there's all sorts of testing, further testing on fingerprints and whatever else. But she's still sitting on death row. Now, here's my question for you. Number one, do you think that there's a possibility that Darlie was telling the truth when she said that there was an intruder? And that she opened her eyes and she saw a man standing at her feet walking away from her? Do you think that there's a possibility that may be true? And number two, if you believe that Darlie is guilty as sin, which, by the way, I do, if you believe she's guilty as sin, how do you feel about the death penalty? Oh, one more question. If Darlie was a man, do you think she would still be sitting on death row?